I want to begin by saying that, unlike Professor Dershowitz, I don't actually think this is a very hard question. I don't think it's a very complex question. That's always what is said whenever it's time to sell a new war. Oh, there's such good arguments on both sides. We have to be very careful about analyzing them. It might be the case that if what we were really debating is this very pretty picture presented by the resolution that Professor Dershowitz just got done advocating, that, oh, all we're going to do is fly a few fighter jets over Iran and we're just going to do little pinpricks, very precise bombs on their nuclear facilities, and that's all we're going to do. I would still ask, what is the benefit of that? The way in which countries proliferate nuclear weapons is through the know-how of their scientists, which you don't eliminate unless you want to kill them too. It's through persuading them, convincing them that they would be safer without nuclear weapons than with nuclear weapons. But the reality is that is not actually what we're discussing. That's the pretense of the war. Every war that we've been sold, from Vietnam to Iraq to the regime change wars of Libya and Syria to the war in Afghanistan, all have had pretexts and pretenses to make them seem so much easier, so much more difficult, so much more deliberate and targeted than they really were. So let me just begin by saying what Professor Dershowitz is really advocating for. And I don't mean that I'm going to read into his soul and try and intuit his motives. I'm going to quote from Professor Dershowitz only 3 weeks ago, where he spoke on the extremely highly esteemed news outlet called Newsmax. And this is what he said he actually wants when it comes to Iran. The headline of the Newsmax article, and this is from April 14, 2024, barely 3 weeks ago, Dershowitz to Newsmax: Iran's attacks won't end without regime change. And the article says, attacks like those that unfolded Saturday against Israel from Iran will happen, quote, again and again. And wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen will never end as long as the Ayatollahs remain in charge of Iran. So the only solution is regime change, Harvard Law professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz argued on Newsweek Sunday. Quote, and this is quoting Professor Dershowitz. He won't tell you this tonight because he wants to pretend he just wants a little bit limited pinprick of a bombing campaign, but this is actually what he wants in his own words. Quote, the only solution is regime change. There must be a change of regime and a return to an Iran which is democratic. 70% of Iranians want regime change, and 90% of Arab states, meaning the U.S.-supported Arab dictators, in the region want regime change. He then went on to say regime change would be carried out through an attack by the United States, which would be aimed at Iran. And then he added, quote, I had dinner the other night with the Shah of Iran's son, the crown prince of Iran, the man who would turn Iran into a democracy if the people of Iran were allowed to vote and return.
Constant name dropping. He cannot miss an opportunity. Even earlier, he said, I've spoken with the leaders of Israel. They love this idea. And then even he recounts the info. I met the son. I met Benito Mussolini Jr., and he wants to lead Italy back to glory.
Exactly.
He cannot avoid name dropping. Like, that would be like somehow he'll be killed someday because he couldn't miss an opportunity to mention that he met someone famous.
I don't know, man. I don't know if Dershowitz has looked into Iran before the revolution, but if I were looking to be have the Iranians, strew flowers at my feet and greet me as a liberator, I maybe wouldn't play up my connection to the Shah's son.
Yeah, the worst human rights record in the world in the 1970s, according to the Human Rights Watch at that time, which is a hell of a title.
Yeah,
that you read.
The 1970s. That's competition was stiff.
Yeah, you got some like all-time greats in that mix. So most impressive. Again, somehow I mark my words. Dershowitz's downfall will come because he couldn't avoid dropping a name. Like, he'll someday incriminate himself in a crime because he can't avoid admitting that he hung out with somebody famous. I swear to God. Yeah,
no, it's he'll finally be on trial for whatever went on in his trips to Pedophile Island, and it'll be a crucial part of his defense that he had never talked to Jeffrey Epstein after 1996 or something, and then he'll just slip up on the stand and be like, yeah, it's just like I was saying to Jeffrey the week before he died.
Just like that's where I met Prince Andrew. Oops.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is my hunch about the end of Dershowitz one day.
From the Shah's family to the rule, but it's not going to happen if the United States does not do a regime change on Iran. So it's not that he just wants a regime change operation on Iran. He wants to reinstall the Shah of Iran's son in the name of spreading democracy and freedom to Iran, just like we did to Afghanistan, just like we did to Vietnam, just like we did to Iraq. And you see what happened there. This is exactly the same propaganda, the exact same mentality, the exact same interest at work. Now, just to remind you, to say that I'm going to return democracy to Iran by reinstalling the regime of the Shah's family, of the Pahlavi regime and dynasty, is like saying, oh, I want to bring freedom and democracy to the world by making Mohammed bin Salman not just the head of Saudi Arabia, but of the entire world. The whole way that the Shah of Iran was installed in the first place was that the Iranians had a democratically elected government that the United States didn't and the West didn't like because it was becoming too nationalistic. It was threatening to nationalize oil reserves and use the proceeds for the benefit of the American people. The CIA overthrew that democratically elected government and planted one of the most brutal and savage dictators the world has ever seen, which is the Shah of Iran, who killed and murdered and put into prison every single dissident and ran that country with an iron fist until there was a revolution in 1979. That is what's really going on here. The reason people like Alan Dershowitz and the CIA in the West wanted to install the Shah and love the Shah and want to return the Shah into Iran isn't because they love democracy and want to spread democracy to the Middle East. It's because the Shah of Iran was a very close ally of Israel and a very close puppet, a very obedient puppet of the United States. And that is what this entire Middle East framework is about, is taking out the leaders who are democratically elected, making sure that the people of the Middle East have no say whatsoever by imposing dictators on those countries which we support and prop up, as we're doing in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Jordan. They want to turn the Middle East into all of that, where there's nothing but puppets of the United States that are very subservient to Israel. That is the real image, in his own words. He's saying, what I really want is regime change, and I want to reinstall the Shah of Iran into that country in order to spread democracy. Now, let me just make a couple of points about a couple of the propagandistic visions that Professor Dershowitz presented. The first one is he wants you to think that we're right around the corner from having another Hitler, another Nazi Germany, and therefore you should make all your decisions based on what we wish we would have done prior to the emergence of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. When I first stopped being a lawyer and began writing about politics in 2005, one of the very first things I noticed was how it seems like our pundit class, our policymaking class, our political class knows only one historical example. It's like they didn't learn anything about history except 1938, Neville Chamberlain, Winston Churchill, and the Nazis. And so everything they want you to believe always should be decided through the scope of the Nazis are coming, Hitler has returned. Now, there's a phrase in law, which I'm sure Professor Dershowitz at Harvard has taught his students, that says bad cases make bad law. In other words, if you're deciding everything based on some extreme case that's very uncommon, you're going to make very bad decisions for other cases that are more common. We have been told over the past 30 years that every single leader we want to go to war with is the new Hitler. We heard that about Saddam Hussein. We heard that about Ho Chi Minh. We heard that about Assad. We heard that about Gaddafi. We hear now that about Hamas, that Hamas is worse than the Nazis or worse than ISIS. We've heard that about Muammar Ahmadinejad, who, if you probably don't remember that Hitler, he was the one who left after serving 2 terms, which the Constitution required. This is the standard propagandistic framework they always tell to you to scare you into thinking that the new Hitler is about to come and therefore we have to take action. But what makes Hitler Hitler, what makes the Nazis Nazis, is that it was a singular evil, unlike things we've seen in history either before or since. And so to let our government or pundits or warmongers scare us all the time into believing that the new Hitler is coming, we're again facing Nazi Germany, is to make extremely bad decisions, always in favor of war, because of course, who wouldn't want to go kill Hitler before he became Hitler? And that's what they want you to think, but that's not actually what we're facing. Now, as far as the claim that, oh, well, we can't wait for proof because the only proof that we're going to have is when Iran finally gets the nuclear bomb, That should be very familiar to anybody above the age of 30, because that is what we were told before the Iraq War when people like Condoleezza Rice were asked, well, where's the evidence of all these nuclear weapons that you say Saddam Hussein has? She said, we can't wait for the proof to be in the form of a smoke cloud, of a nuclear cloud over the United States. So that was what they were saying was, oh, we don't have any evidence that Iran has nuclear weapons. We don't have any evidence that they're going to use them, but we can't wait. We have to do preventive war, which was a brand new concept for Iraq that he now wants to bring back for Iran. Prior to the war in Iraq, there was no such thing as preventive war. There was preemptive war, meaning if a country was on the verge of attacking you, you had the right to attack them. Obviously, Iraq wasn't on the verge of attacking the United States in 2002 and 3, so they invented a new term called preventive war that allowed the United States to go into Iraq, one of the worst foreign policy disasters in the history of our country. And I would simply ask you whether you want to repeat that, because everything that he just got done saying is what we were told in 2002 and 2003, and so many other times as well, including in Syria and in Libya. Now, it's not just Professor Dershowitz who wants regime change in Iran, it's also the government of Israel. We have this amazing coincidence in our foreign policy over the last 20 years that we keep getting told that we, the United States and Americans, have to go to war just totally coincidentally against all of Israel's worst enemies. So we went to war against Saddam Hussein, who Israel hated so much that they actually worked with and armed the Iranians in their war against Iraq. We tried to pull President Assad, Bashar al-Assad, out of Syria, who the Israelis saw as an extension of Iran. We ended up fighting on the same side as al-Qaeda and ISIS to do so. We failed. We left that country in complete destruction. We were told that we have to remove Gaddafi in Libya, even though we had partnered with him for so long, because he was one of the most pro-Palestinian voices in the region. We did actually remove Gaddafi from power, even though President Obama swore that the purpose of the war was simply to protect the people of Benghazi. It had nothing to do with regime change, and we got that leader out as well. So in 2021, according to the Times of Israel, it reported the following, quote, Defense Minister of Israel, Benny Gantz, and Mossad Chief David Barnera will push during their meetings this week in Washington with senior Biden administration officials for the United States to carry out a military strike on Iranian targets, Israel's 3 main TV news broadcasts reported Saturday night. So on some level, I would argue that just bombing Iran is not actually good for Israel's national security, but there's no world in which bombing Iran, which is what he wants our country to do, bomb Iran, having the United States bomb Iran, would actually benefit our national security as well. Now, let me just remind you of all the different times over the past, say, 20 years that we have heard over and over everything about Iran that Professor Dershowitz is trying to scare you into believing that they're just about to get nuclear weapons, they're weeks away, they're months away, we have to go bomb them. This is not something that only began recently. In fact, we've been hearing this exact same thing for 20 years and none of it ever came true. So you should decide tonight whether there's any reason after hearing this for 20 years, you're now suddenly willing to believe that Iran is on the verge of getting nuclear weapons to the point that we have to go start a new war with Iran. Jeffrey Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic and a strong supporter of Israel, wrote a cover story for The Atlantic called The Point of No Return in 2010, where he told Americans it was more than 50% likely that the Israelis were about to go bomb Iran in the next 3 months because they didn't have more than months before Iran finally acquired a nuclear weapon. You can go all the way back to 2005, where NBC News reported the following. This is 2005, 20 years ago, quote, Israel should take, quote, bold and courageous action against arch-foe Iran's nuclear program, similar to its 1981 strike on the main Iraqi reactor, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday. Israeli officials have said that unless stopped, Iran will achieve the know-how to build a bomb by March of next year. In 2010, Jeffrey Goldberg said, based on my conversations with Israeli decision makers, in Israel, we heard this as 9 months from June. In other words, March of 2011, that's all Israel has. If we assume that nothing changes in these estimates, this will mean we have to begin thinking about our next step beginning at the turn of the year.
The New York Times in 2012, President Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel told the UN that Iran's capability to enrich uranium must be stopped before next spring or early summer, arguing that by the time the country will be in a position to make a short, undetectable sprint to manufacture nuclear weapons. Reuters in 2015, CBS in 2018, BBC in 2019 all say exactly the same thing. Oh, we're only months away. We have for sure these intelligence photos with a big red arrow pointing at some random building that we have discovered is where Iran is about to proliferate their nuclear weapons. It's been happening over and over that you've been lied to for 20 years. Why would you suddenly believe it and support a new war against a country that's 3 times as large as Iraq, risking all of the major escalation and instability and huge war that we know will happen? Now, if you want Iran not to build a nuclear weapon, there is a very easy way to do that, which is to signal to them that the safest way for them to reintegrate into the international community is by agreeing not to build a nuclear weapon in exchange for having sanctions lifted. That was the Iran deal that President Obama did in 2015. And according to the Congressional Research Service, in April of 2024, just a month ago, when he was telling Newsmax what he really wants is a regime change in Iran, they documented how during the entire Iran deal, when sanctions were lifted, Iran never took any steps to build a nuclear weapon beyond what they were allowed to do. They had everything open to inspectors. They were always doing exactly what that agreement called for. And it was only once that deal was terminated, which the Israelis and many Israel supporters in the United States urged President Trump to do, did we begin again hearing that they were close to nuclear weapons. The 1981 example that he cites often about when Israel bombed Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi reactor is the perfect example. Prior to 1981, there was almost no evidence Saddam Hussein had an active nuclear program. It was a very vague aspiration. What drove Iraq to try and get nuclear weapons was precisely the fact that Israel attacked them. That's the message we send to the world all the time. If you have nuclear weapons, if you're North Korea or if you're Pakistan, we won't mess with you. If you give up your nukes, though, the way Saddam Hussein did, or the way Gaddafi did, that is when you're vulnerable to regime change. We've created a world where the incentive is to get nuclear weapons through the kind of aggression and militarism that he advocates. According to a Washington Post op-ed by defense official Colin Kahl, he said, and he cited several academic studies, that after the 1981 bombing by Israel in Iraq, quote, the Iraqi nuclear program increased from a program of 400 scientists and $400 million to one of 7,000 scientists and $10 billion. And this is what we've seen over and over, that when you, as the United States, say, we're going to rule the world by force, we're going to go bomb whoever we want, that sends the signal to the world that you better get nuclear weapons. That's the only protection against that. But when the United States cooperates with countries and reaches deals with countries and opens up those countries like we had with Iran, that is when the world becomes much safer. That is when you take away the incentive for countries to get nuclear weapons. Bombing Iran will have no effect on their nuclear capability. Maybe it'll set it back by a year or so. And then what are you going to do? Bomb them again? You're going to increase the incentive for them to get it. But what I can guarantee you will happen is that exactly what we saw in Iraq, there will be destruction throughout the region. Even Tony Blair, one of the most vocal advocates of the war in Iraq, admitted that the main result of invading Iraq was to create instability and a vacuum of power in the region that gave rise to ISIS. And you can look at every study, including from the Brookings Institution, from all kinds of think tanks that usually are not shy about supporting war. And what they will say, they will have a long list of horribles about the kind of infiltration and fire that will set out in the Middle East if we do something like try and a little pinprick on Iran. Even if that were in the most ideal world was our goal, that will not be the result. We saw what Iran did by Israel. He forgot to mention this when he was talking about Iran sending those missiles over to Israel. It was preceded by something that happened, which was Israel went to Syria and bombed a consulate of Iran, something that every country would react to that way. The more we attack countries in the Middle East, the more we destabilize the Middle East, the more death and destruction we bring with no benefit, the more we try and cooperate and bring a world of peace, the less threat of nuclear weapons you will find. Thank you.
Thank you. Bam.
Yeah, really powerful, and just some expert level trolling there from Greenwald, going back to Dershowitz's public statements over numerous years, over the span of 30 years. 2005 wasn't really 30 years ago, and there he is saying, "Oh, it's literally in a year they'll have nuclear weapons," and then again 10 years later, and again 10 years after that. Like, that's pretty devastating. And you got to figure, like, Dershowitz is like aware of this possibility. You're fucking famous. You've been making statements on TV about this stuff for so long. Like, oh, they're just about to. Yeah, but you said that when I was like a young person.
Yeah, Iran is. Iran, developing a nuke is always happening in n+1 years, right? Where that. That's just whatever year we happen to be in right now. And actually, to his last point about the missiles, and it's really good because, like, this is not just a canned opening statement. Elements of it are, of course, right, that, like, obviously prepared in advance, but the way he folded in stuff that was a direct response to what Dershowitz just said was really good, and in that direct response at the end, it's like, it's not just, like, you can even take this a step further. It's not just that, of course, Iran was retaliating for Israel blowing up their embassy, but also that they were retaliating in the most, like, restrained way that you possibly could. I mean, this is, like, essentially what they did was, hey, just so you know, we are about to very slowly send a small number of missiles over there. Gosh, I hope nobody shoots them down.
Yeah, like, clearing the flyover with American allies 72 hours before 3 days. It's like, but they're just about to really get them, though.
Yeah, it's clearly it would be a massive loss of face if they didn't retaliate at all. But it's like, also, guys, we really don't want to go to war right now. Like, so we are going to figure out, like, the way of retaliating that's the least likely to escalate this.
Yeah, I gotta say, the only thing about this that makes me sympathetic to Dershowitz is he's selling a product no one wants it. No one wants another giant war. People hate the wars that are happening now. There's so little appetite for more wars. Like, one benefit of the war on terror is that, like, it really kind of killed America's appetite for wars for a generation. I feel like, some part of the country is always dying for it, of course, but, like, among a lot of the mainstream, and of course people who are more politically left, like, it is like a hard sell now. And you could see Dershowitz kind of commenting, like, okay, maybe you don't want this, but here's why we have no choice, because Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon and kill us in 45 minutes if we don't bomb them right now.
Yeah. Which
it's an uphill battle because no one wants it.
All this appetite to do for the last what are we up to here? Like, the 55 years since the Iranian Revolution, like, that they right, 1970,
45.
45. You're right, 45. Right, so it's been 45 years since the Iranian Revolution, and it's like, in that time, when exactly and how exactly have they shown the slightest appetite to, like, kill Americans in America?
Yeah, hostage taking after we were supporting the torture monger regime. In revolutions, you're going to see that shit when you take a side like that, especially a really evil and popular side. But outside of Iran's borders, they support Hezbollah. Well, like, great. Based on that, like, we have our blood. Every drop of blood in the world is on our hands because of our military connections.
Oh my God, yeah. Like, the U.S. loves arming people so much that, like, every now and again we actually double dip, like the Iran-Iraq war.
Yes. God. Just demonic. Demonic acts.
We like war so much, sometimes we'll actually support both sides at the same time. Oh my
God. Like, that's how much I like it. I bet on both sides of this game. That's how much I love the game. I just love the game that much.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh my God.
Last point I wanted to add is, like, okay, so at the end, Glenn said something that was correct, right? He said that if you want, Iran not to, develop a nuke, then the obvious way to do that is to to tie it with, sanctions relief, right? That's what the Obama deal was, and fair enough, that's true. But it's like, you know what they would even like, and it's like a little bit hard to claw that back because Donald Trump tore it up, and it's a granted, I don't really think that Anthony Blinken has been having sleepless nights trying to restore that, but like even if he did, right, it's a little bit hard now because it's like once you've shown that like the American commitment to this is that shallow, right? Like it's hard to get it back. But like, look, you know what the Iranians would 110% fucking go for? Nuke-free Middle East, right? There's
most of the region supports that.
Yeah, pretty much almost everybody in the region is in favor of that, right? I mean, if you just be like, none of the countries in this region will have nukes, right? Like
the best. What a beautiful idea it remains to this day.
Yeah, exactly.
Seven and a half minutes of rebuttal. 7.5 minutes of rebuttal from Alan Dershowitz. Take it away, Alan.
Israel, of course. Israel succeeded in its attacks on both the Iraqi and the Syrian nuclear reactors with minimal casualties, and neither Syria nor Iraq has continued to develop nuclear weapons. The Middle East is a lot safer because of Israel's surgical attacks, careful attacks, very, very cautious attacks on both Iraq and Syria's nuclear reactors. Now, I would love to see Israel be able to cooperate with Iran and work out a deal and try to avoid them getting nuclear weapons or a nuclear arsenal without an attack. That would be far, far better. But it's just not going to happen. And there are some very, very thoughtful people who now honestly believe that Iran is just months away from having a nuclear arsenal and enough bombs to destroy Israel. And of course, we know that Iran operates through surrogates. It operates through far less responsible organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and others. And the idea that any of them would get nuclear weapons is so potentially disturbing to world peace that it's worth at least considering what the realistic options are. If Iran does develop a nuclear arsenal, it will change everything in the Middle East. It will change everything in the world. And remember, because Iran is a theocracy, which bases its decisions on the leaders of the Ayatollah, a kind of cataclysmic approach, which focuses more on the world to come than on this world, is not beyond the realm of dispute. And the question is a question of probabilities. Nobody knows for absolute certain. Nobody knows with any degree of prophecy. You know, the Bible says that, or the Talmud says the prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. And so we're left with a world of probabilities. And one has to ask what the worst probabilities are. And the question is, what would be worse? A preventive attack on a nascent Iranian a nuclear arsenal, or leaving it alone and allowing Iran to develop a nuclear arsenal, which would change everything in the Middle East. You know, we heard my distinguished opponent talk about how many times Israel thought about bombing Iran, but they've never done it. They've never done it, not because they didn't have the capacity to do it, but they were waiting for a much higher level of certainty and a much higher ability to do to Iran what they did to Iraq and Syria, and that is to destroy the nuclear potential without endangering civilians. For example, in Iraq, I think one civilian died, an Egyptian who was not, I'm sorry, a French technician who was not supposed to be at the Osiris reactor. It was on a Saturday or something like that, or a Friday when they were supposed to be home, and accidentally he was there. And if it didn't totally destroy, it set back the Iraqi nuclear program for many years. In fact, it's never been renewed again. And so it is a question of probabilities. And yes, I favor regime change in Iran. Iran is the most dangerous country in the modern world. It is the modern day Nazi Germany. And the potential for Iran using its aggressive behavior, which it now assigns to surrogates, and doing it in a more direct, effective way. Remember that Iran sent hundreds of missiles to Israel just a few weeks ago. Imagine if a half a dozen of them were nuclear tipped. Every country has the right of self-defense, and regime change would be good for the vast majority of Iranians want regime change. The only reason there is Ayatollah regime in Iran is because it's a despotic regime. It's the furthest thing in the world from democracy. And so if the Iranian regime could be changed, look, I don't want the Shah, I don't want anybody close to the Shah to be the leader of Iran, but you have to choose between evils, and you have to choose the lesser of the evils. And I have to tell you, the Iranian regime was less bad on a scale of really bad under the Shah of Iran, and it would be much, much less bad under his far more liberal and far more accommodating a son than it would have been under the Ayatollahs. So, you know, we don't live in a world of good, better, best. We live in a world of bad, worse, worser, worsest, and intolerable. And all I'm trying to do is move it from intolerable to not so bad. And that's the risk that would be incurred if the United States were to take a preventive action. And I think in the end, when you think about what the world would look like if the United States didn't and Israel together didn't take preventive action, and if Iran were to develop a nuclear arsenal, which it would then allocate to its even less responsible surrogates, such as Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, or a world in which Iran were deprived of the ability to create a nuclear arsenal. And it's a hard question. I disagree with the opening statement of my distinguished opponent that this is not a hard question. It is a very hard question. And I hope and pray we don't ever become in a situation like occurred in after Nazi Germany, where we regret not having taken action. In Nazi Germany, we had enough information and we learned to regret, and it cost millions and millions and millions of lives. I hope we never get to that situation where we look back at this debate and we regret not having taken the action that I advocate we should take.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Man won't walk to the podium. Man's got podium shame. Right there.
Yeah. See, you know, Glenn is taking it seriously. He's bringing his A game. He's willing to walk to the podium
He's
and
willing
back.
to walk several feet like he wants it more. Yeah, pretty great. I love that Greenwald just goes up. He makes the same joke I did, which is like, you guys have one story that you tell. It's everyone is Hitler, and if you don't want to send missiles into that country and kill its people, you're Chamberlain appeasing Hitler in Munich.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Greenwald makes fun of it, and then he just goes right back to it and says, actually, Iran is the Nazi Germany of today. That's so funny because Nazi Germany started dozens of wars and Iran had zero So 0, that's interesting. 0 genocides, to date, fingers crossed, you're reaching Dershowitz. Everyone is Hitler. But it reminds me, too, that was the famous controversial thing with his colleague, Johnny Cochran, when he concluded the O.J. Simpson criminal case. He compared Mark Fuhrman, the highly racist LAPD detective, to Hitler. That's what this is. He's just remembering what worked, again, in the 90s. Like, he's borrowing from Cochran, and it's just like, well, he's Hitler. It just is Hitler.
Yeah.
They are Nazi Germany. They don't do anything bad to other people, but they are.
Yeah, I mean, look, Dershowitz at least kind of supported the war in Iraq. I would be very unsurprised if we can find some old quotes from him saying that Saddam Hussein is Hitler. I mean, who knows? I will say, just like a couple of weeks ago, Matthew Whalen and I were watching the debate on, Israel, Palestine, and Iran with a few people, one of whom was Dennis Prager. And Dennis Prager actually claimed at one point that Hamas is so bad that he was willing to compare them to the Nazis. But he said he'd actually never compared anybody to the Nazis in his whole life as a political commentator, because that was such a serious comparison. But he's willing to do it now for Hamas. Wow. And then later in the debate, Dave Smith, who's one of the people he's arguing with, says, look, I'll bet you supported the war in Iraq. And he's like, no, I didn't. And conveniently, both of these things, 2 and 1, are refuted if you go to Dennis Prager's website right now. He's never taken this off. And see
fucking liar. God.
A ancient debate that he'd done with Rabbi Michael Lerner, which is still being sold at PragerStore.com in CD format for the low price of $18. If you want that, you still have a CD player.
If you're some elitist who's too good for an 8-track.
Yeah. And the summary of the debate on the Dennis Prager website includes the line, like they're summarizing each of their main points. Dennis Prager says the United States should invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein is the modern day Hitler. It's like just total like lie through his fucking teeth. So anyway,
wow.
I don't know if Alan Dershowitz has any Saddam Hussein as Hitler statements in his back catalog, but let me just register that I'd be very unsurprised. But like when he says, so he just completely ignores the track record of everybody being Hitler that Glenn pointed out. He just restates it, like you said, super lazy. This is just such a lazy performance. Also, he says Iran, he made 2 really interesting comments about Iran there, right? He said that Iran is the furthest thing in the world from democracy. And he said that Iran is the most dangerous country in the world. And so it's like, okay, let's take these one at a time.
Most dangerous. Wow. Most dangerous.
Most dangerous. Yeah. Most dangerous. There's no country in the world that's more dangerous than Iran. As you point out, total number of wars that Iran has started since the revolution in 1979, or really fucking ever. But if we're just going to start,
we can roll it back for quite some distance, but certainly in the Cold War period on.
Yeah, you'd really
been alive.
I'm pretty sure that I don't know if there are really any good examples since like the Persian Empire, but whatever. Like
it's really reaching now.
But like certainly as long as the president regime has been there in Iran, like, there are no examples, of like Iran itself, not like arming some group that's doing this or that, right? But like Iran itself directly initiating a war with another country. The Iran-Iraq war, generally speaking, it seemed like the American conventional wisdom is that Saddam Hussein started that one, right? So like, that's like, what's the war that Iran started, right? Like in the last 45 years, they've, had their present form of government in Iran, 0 wars. How many wars has the United States started in the last 45 years? If we're just
or Israel, try and count them. Try and count them. It'll take you a while.
Yeah, no, my God, how many wars has Israel started, right? Certainly, but like I mean, the United States, the last 45 years, we have been very, very busy with new wars, like left and right. Like, thank you, like very much, Alan Dershowitz, for your contributions to that, to making that the case.
He's definitely one of the people we have to thank. That is true.
But like, so it's like, yeah, the idea this is the most dangerous country in the world is so bizarre. It's like, yeah, this is a country that's like, yeah, it's like a major regional power that like will back like various groups or whatever. It's like, but it's like, look, it's just what you mean by the most dangerous is that it's the only major power in the Middle East that's like not subservient to the United States, right?
Yeah,
that's
it's not integrated into our state system. Yeah, subservient to Israel. I would just add to what Greenwald said, like it doesn't let in Western investors freely. That's always the other part of it. It doesn't let our capitalists own their economy. It doesn't let us put military bases there, and it doesn't kill who we kill when we want them killed. It's all true. Like those are the. Yeah, that's why we're mad. Like Dershowitz says, they're a theocracy.
Well, okay, so this brings us to the other one that like it's the furthest thing from democracy. It's like, look, if it's a yes or no question, is Iran a democracy? I would say no, right? It's a very authoritarian system in many ways, right? Like there's I mean, tons and tons of like protests and riots and like all this stuff that's happened because of the very authoritarian repressive features of the system. Like there are some really important theocratic features of the system that are very oppressive and very awful, right? But that's not the same thing as what Dershowitz said. He said it was the furthest thing in the world from a democracy. It's like, no, it's fucking not, right? Like if you're going to measure systems by their distance from some ideal of democracy, yeah, Iran's pretty far away, but my God, like there are so many countries in the world today that are so much further than Iran is. I mean, Iran has regular elections.
Yeah, they have a balloting. Yeah. They have, like, it's a sham with pre-selected candidates from the Supreme Council. I mean, serving the role that our billionaire donors play in the United States, of course. But there is a balloting, like Saudi Arabia, theocracy, like fucking Saudi Arabia. Like, you could sit there and say that.
Well, so that's
Saudi Arabia
thing,
and United Arab Emirates and shit. My God.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, they do have elections, right? They're less democratic, certainly, than American elections, which are themselves, I would argue, much less democratic than, say, Canadian elections, right? Or like Western European elections. But in lots of important ways, we could get into. I'm sure most people who are watching this are fairly aware of the critique that we would make there. But like, but yeah, right. Look, Iranian elections are much less democratic than ours because there's like so much, like which politicians are allowed to participate is so rigidly limited, but they do have elections. The most hardline candidate doesn't always win, right? There are like within narrowly set parameters, there are actually somewhat competitive elections in Iran, right? Like that's so compare that to within the region, right? And by the way, you know where else pre-selects which candidates can participate in the Middle East? It also starts with I, but there's a like Israel has, the Zionist political spectrum, within that spectrum, there's like all kinds of fierce disagreement and people hate each other and et cetera, et cetera. They have a zillion parties and, as far as that goes, actually much more democratic than us, but like, but like Arab parties have often been disqualified from participating because they're too anti-Zionist, right? That's like they do have an elections commission there that is a bit like a sort of Zionism guardianship council, and there have been like very real limitations to Israeli Arabs, political participation and saying anything that questions, the sort of fundamentals of the state too much. But it's like, look, forget that, right? Like, just, fucking Saudi Arabia. By what possible standard, if you're going to say it's the furthest thing in the world, it's not even the furthest thing in the immediate neighborhood.
Yeah, man. Saudi, far further. There's not even a sham election. That's further away. That's further. Sorry.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is significantly further from being a real.
Come on, and that's like the obvious counterpart. Like they're like neighboring attack. Like come on, like this is again like you said earlier. Like this is old material from Dershowitz. This is like 90s material. He's been carrying around that same dog-eared, paper-clipped stack of paper that he had out before. He's counting on his cute socks to like carry him through the debate. Like all these lazy, cheap tactics to win debates, like novelty socks. Don't try it, guys. You need to prepare. Don't count on your hosiery to carry you through.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. But yeah, no, it's so ridiculous. I mean, like also like let's just really like be clear on this. Like, yes, like Saudi Arabia, monarchy, right? Just to start with. You know, certainly as far as like gender apartheid is like a big element of this sort of undemocraticness of Iran. Way more severe in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, imprisoning women activists. That's but again for Iran, it's because they were in a demonstration for political reform, which is very bad. In Saudi Arabia, you're locking up women because they're activists for women driving a car. Like not even just a particle of threat to the power of the regime. But then, women, they can drive a car. Next thing you know, they have clothing with pockets. They have abortions. You can't control them anymore. So you just have to stop at you have to put the fire out at the beginning. And if that means that they can't even do their own errands, then so be it.
Like Saudi Arabia in this century, right? Like, and not at the beginning of the century, like when Obama was president, Saudi Arabia executed someone for sorcery.
I forgot about that. God, and God, you just know that like the prosecution's chief, the chief DA was, I'm not literate enough to do an Arab name version.
The Farsi equivalent of Alan Dershowitz.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I know when to like refer to a joke rather than try it.
Yeah, rather than try to actually make it. Yeah,
one of you don't have a job to lose for fucking it up. You can do it.
Yeah. No, and it's like, look, and this is like a very relevant comparison because Saudi is Iran's main regional like rival, right? I mean, it's Saudi and Israel, but I mean, but Saudi Arabia in a lot of ways is the one that's like directly lined up against it. And not only does Alan Dershowitz not like go around like advocating that the U.S. bomb them or do regime change, but like right now. Right under Joe Biden, like the U.S. is like moving towards a mutual defense pact. So if anybody did, so like the United States would actually have to go to war on behalf of Saudi Arabia, right? So I mean that's the background for this idea that we're supposed to take seriously that the U.S. is so committed to democracy in the Middle East that like that's why we'd have to go to war with Iran.
Yeah, to defend democracy and Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf monarchies, which really vary in terms of how heinously repressive they are to various kinds of people, from their enslaved domestic servants up to anybody who might have a non-heteronormative lifestyle or be a fucking Shiite or a Sunni in the other one. Like it's that's pretty rich stuff. Yeah, so I mean. This is Dershowitz. Even though it's lazy material, it's still. It is embarrassing. I feel like we do deserve a little better, frankly, than this. Like I feel like Greenwald's a lot more dynamic. He's really landing his shots, and this is just like material from the '90s that does great if you're doing a presentation to the Atlantic Council. I'm sure.
Yeah. No, this is like. Yeah, this is. This is the debate equivalent of Jerry Seinfeld doing a gig in 2024 where he's taking out his like yellow legal pad that's where the pages will like turn to dust if you press them too hard and telling jokes about what's the deal with airplane food.
Yeah, and you try some, and then even you try some new material and the older fans are like, boo, we want the hits. Like play the hits. No one wants the new album. Alan. It's true. So maybe we play a role in this also. But I have this in my notes. I want to add this too. I'm extremely excited about how every time Alan speaks, he talks about the very liberal son of the Shah. Because again, Alan's name dropping is my favorite thing he does. I've been clear about that. But also, I'm just really hoping that if he keeps mentioning him, he'll somehow bring up another great guy who's very promising, who I met. Ahmad Shalabi is his name. Very promising, very liberal, reforming figure. Huge amount of support in the country. Oh God, they love him.
You also note that like when Glenn was doing his trolling about the Shah's family, like Alan couldn't quite decide on a response because he was sort of like, it's like, oh, what are you talking about? When did I say I wanted to restore the Shah's family? Although,
I know he's definitely having it both ways there. Of course I don't, but if it did, it would be good. That's all I'm saying. No money has changed hands that can be proven.
Yeah, exactly. I
just love like Alan.
I did have dinner with him. He seemed very nice. I seemed very accommodated.
Yeah, I think Alan is definitely a mark for smooth, shitty, cynical operators from foreign countries like Shalabi, like this, like Shah Pahlavi Jr. or whoever the fuck this is. Like he's definitely like, well, he seems very nice. He bought me a very expensive lunch at a very nice spot in DC. I mean, how bad can he be?
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.